The ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, said she would be here shortly. She had to stop by our office. We came up on the elevator together, so as soon as she gets here, we'll get started. Good morning. The committee will come to order. I'd like to first address the tragedy that happened this morning. Our prayers and thoughts go out to all those who were affected, our colleagues, staff, and Capitol Police who were injured in the shooting this morning. Obviously, our colleague Steve Scalise, the whip, who I understand has undergone surgery or is currently, and also Special Agent David Bailey and Crystal Greiner, as well as a former staffer and a current staffer, Zachary Barf and Matt Micah. So we want to do everything we can within our powers to pull for them and keep them in our prayers. And I think I speak for all of us when I say how grateful we are to the Capitol Police and the security detail, particularly that they were on the scene. You know, the whip not there, I guess there wouldn't have been security there, and that's a very scary thought because unfortunately the carnage which could have occurred is hard to imagine, or you just don't want to think about it. They are heroes, and we should applaud them today, and our prayers will continue to go out for those recovering, and we hope that they're back on Capitol Hill as soon as possible. And so I will then move into my opening statement. The committee is here today to examine how the Small Business Administration managed its fiscal year 2014 Voluntary Early Retirement Authority and Voluntary Separation Incentive Payment Program. According to the SBA's Office of Inspector General, the SBA failed to effectively manage and implement this program. Now, I would note that the shortcomings that I'm about to highlight obviously occurred under the previous administration, and the current administration shouldn't necessarily obviously be responsible for what happened in the past, but we're hoping that they will improve on what was there. That's obviously the goal and the purpose of this committee and our oversight. The Voluntary Early Retirement Authority, or VERA, allows federal agencies the option to offer voluntary early retirement to restructure and downsize an agency's workforce. Usually combined with VERA, the Voluntary Separation Incentive Payment Authority, or VSIP, allows agencies to offer lump sum payments of up to $25,000 to employees who are in surplus positions or have skills that are no longer needed. In 2014, the SBA submitted a request to the Office of Personnel Management for VERA and VSIP authority. The SBA claimed that it wanted to, 1, address workforce competency and agency skills gaps, 2, decrease the average age of the agency's workforce, and 3, address budgetary constraints to avoid a reduction in force. OPM granted SBA's request. The Office of Inspector General conducted an audit of the SBA's management of its VERA VSIP program, and in its audit released just a couple of weeks ago, the OIG determined that the SBA failed to achieve any of its goals. Let me repeat that. They didn't meet any of the goals, not one or two of them, but all of them. It did not address workforce competency and agency skills gaps. It did not decrease the average age of the agency's workforce. It did not address budgetary constraints to avoid a reduction in force. In fact, apparently the agency was facing no real threat of a reduction in force. OIG's audit uncovered a number of other troubling findings. The SBA did not complete a skills gap assessment until a year after the VERA VSIP was implemented. SBA did not have a contingency plan to transfer institutional knowledge to younger employees. The SBA did not even have a tracking mechanism to determine which employees were taking advantage of the early retirement buyouts. Further, the SBA gave inaccurate information in its plan submitted to OPM. The SBA claimed it had established a high-risk task force to examine the challenges necessitating the VERA VSIP. No such task force ever existed. The SBA claimed a steering committee was established to review the agency workforce allotments. No steering committee existed. The VERA and VSIP options are supposed to help agencies restructure and reshape their workforces, yet the SBA's workforce was left almost completely unchanged. This hearing will hopefully pull out lessons learned from the SBA that they can use in the future. And more broadly, as other agencies potentially seek to restructure their workforces through the VERA VSIP options, they can also learn from the SBA's experience or lack thereof. To learn that, as with most things in life, preparation is key. We want to thank the Office of Inspector General for its work on this topic. The OIG's work helps to improve the integrity, accountability, and performance of the SBA and its programs. This audit report is just one example of that. We want to thank our witnesses both for being here today. We look forward to your testimony, and I would now like to yield to the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on behalf of the Democratic side, I too want to say that we stand united in praying for our colleagues, the staffers, and the police injured. And we extend our profound thanks to the Capitol Police for their bravery in preventing this situation from being much, much worse. One of the benefits of serving on this committee is that even in times of political partisanship, this committee functions in a largely bipartisan manner. Given today's events, I think we can all agree that setting partisanship aside a little more often and focusing on our commonalities as legislators seeking to improve our nation might behoove us. I know this committee does that with great frequency, and that is something for which I am thankful. On that note, let me turn to today's hearing. SBA, as the only agency in the federal government charged specifically with helping small businesses grow and succeed, the Small Business Administration is critical to our nation's overall economic health. All of its functions serve to strengthen and preserve the entrepreneurial foundation of our economy. For small businesses to fully reap the benefits of SBA programs, it is important for the agency to operate efficiently and effectively. As such, one of the most important roles of this committee is conducting vigorous oversight of the SBA and its activities. This allows us to know that the agency is serving small businesses well while spending taxpayers' dollars wisely. For example, as recently as last year, after a request to review the management of the SBA, GAO testified to this committee that the agency's organizational structure was overly complex and that workforce planning was not up to date. Because such redundancies and deficiencies can ultimately lead to poor service to entrepreneurs, we must emphasize the importance of improved agency operations. As such, today's hearing will focus on similar findings from the IG's recently released report on SBA's management of its FY 2014 voluntary early retirement authority Authority and Voluntary Separation Incentive Payment Program. Specifically, I am greatly concerned about the lack of progress that SBA made in addressing its organizational structure through these programs. For instance, the IG found that because SBA did not achieve its goals, the agency paid over $2 million for early retirements for positions that were not restructured. Furthermore, former SBA Administrator Maria Contreras-Sweet testified last year that 150 employees took early retirement under the Vera VIPSIP program, allowing SBA to recruit candidates with specific competencies. Yet, no skill gap analysis was performed prior to the program, and SBA failed to target such employees for the program based on those skills. Those actions raised a number of questions that it is important we evaluate so that we can ensure SBA is operating in the best way possible to assist our nation's job creators. But to do so, SBA must take heed of the IG's suggestion for better management of the VIPSIP authority. Effective implementation of organizational matters are critical to the agency's ability to serve small businesses. In that vein, I think it is notable to mention that the use of the program occurred prior to our current SBA management's arrival. And while there is still much work to do, I am pleased that steps are being taken to address the IG's recommendation. I look forward to the witness testimonies and hearing how the agency can improve its structure and exercise of personal authority. With that, I yield back, and I thank the witnesses.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and I'll take just a moment to explain our rules, and I would preface that with reminding committee members that if they have opening statements prepared, they can submit them for the record. We operate under the 5-minute rule. As I'm sure you know, each of you will have 5 minutes to testify. There's a lighting system to assist you. The green light will be on for 4 minutes. The yellow light will come on, letting you know you got a minute to wrap up. And then the red light will come on, and we'd ask you as much as possible to stay within those time limits. And we also restrict ourselves to 5 minutes as well. And I'd now like to formally introduce our witness today. Our first witness, I think, is one of the coolest names in Washington. Hannibal Ware, and with a cool name like Hannibal, he goes by Mike. So, but great name. Mr. Ware serves as the Acting Inspector General for the Small Business Administration Office of Inspector General. The OIG is responsible for the independent oversight of the SBA's programs and operations. The OIG conducted the audit that is the subject of today's hearing. We look forward to hearing Mr. Ware's testimony today, and our second witness will be Mr. Joseph Lodo, who is the Chief Operating Officer at the Small Business Administration. Joseph's a cool name, too. Happens to be my middle name. In this role, Mr. Lodo works to improve overall agency performance by implementing innovative, effective, and more efficient processes throughout the agency. Mr. Lodo is a member of the Senior Executive Service with 30 years of experience in the federal government. Mr. Lodo also served as a captain in the U.S. Army, and thank you for your service. We welcome Mr. Lodo today and look forward to his testimony as well. And Mr. Ware, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Velasquez, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and for your continued support of the Office of Inspector General. We recently published the results of our audit of the Small Business Administration's management of the Voluntary Early Retirement Authority, also called VERA, and Voluntary Separation Incentive Payment, also called VSIP, program. I'm happy to discuss our findings with you today. According to the Office of Personnel Management, agencies may use VERA and VSIP to decrease the workforce when undergoing substantial organizational change, such as restructuring or downsizing. Both reorganization tools require approval from OPM. In fiscal year 2014, SBA requested and obtained VERA and VSIP authority from OPM. Within SBA's fiscal year 2014 request and approval, only employees eligible for either full retirement or VERA were entitled to apply for the VSIP. In its request, SBA cited programmatic, demographic, and budgetary challenges as justification to use the VERA VSIP authority to reshape its workforce to succeed in meeting its mission. To achieve this initiative, SBA drafted the Vera Visa plan with the purposes of 1, addressing workforce competency and skill gaps, 2, increasing the population of early career employees and creating a pipeline of new leaders, and 3, addressing budgetary constraints to avoid a reduction in force. It should be noted, OIG was made aware of concerns regarding the manner in which SBA exercised its authority from OPM. As such, we conducted a review to determine whether SBA accomplished its fiscal year 2014 Vera Visa program goals. As a basis for our audit, we relied upon applicable laws, regulations, and OPM's guidance on Vera and Visa. Our office found that while SBA made limited progress in restructuring and reshaping the workforce, it did not accomplish its stated goals of the Vera Visa program. As a result, SBA paid $2.1 million for early retirements for positions that were not restructured following Vera Visa. In context of goals stated to OPM, it was troubling to find SBA included inaccurate information in the Vera Visa plan. We also found in carrying out the Vera Visa plan, SBA did not make significant changes to its organizational structure. In fact, SBA did not have a restructuring plan in place before offering the Vera Visa option, which of course made it difficult for SBA to achieve desired organizational structure changes. Overall, SBA may have been more successful in achieving its goals had it properly managed the Vera Visa program by developing specific and measurable Vera Visa goals, including accurate information in the plan, making significant changes to its organizational structure, and making substantial changes to job functions following Vera Visa. We provided 2 recommendations to improve SBA's management of its Vera Visa program. We recommended that SBA conduct and document a lesson learned review on the fiscal year 2014 Vera Visa performance, including planning, implementation, results, and recommended improvements. We also recommended that SBA develop and issue procedural guidance to ensure that agency officials conduct future Vera Visa programs in accordance with Vera and Visa regulations and OPM guidance. SBA officials agreed to implement corrective actions to resolve both of these recommendations. It is important to note the decisions and actions that underline our findings occurred in the past. As such, our recommendations are aimed at ensuring SBA learns from this most recent experience and strengthens internal controls to ensure any future exercise of Vera Visa authority achieves stated goals and objectives, and to ensure the agency is a steward of the taxpayers' dollars. I am proud of the work performed by our auditors to shine the light on this significant exercise of personnel authority by the SBA. Though the findings of our report are ascribed to SBA, it is a timely report in context of the March 13, 2017 Presidential Executive Order on a comprehensive plan for reorganizing the executive branch. Vera Visa Authority undoubtedly will be a tool that many agencies will consider as they seek to implement this order. In this regard, it is noted OPM updated its Vera Visa guidance in March of 2017. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I look forward to your questions. And if I may, I'd like to publicly offer my concern and prayers for those affected by that outrageous act of violence this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that greatly. Mr. Lodo, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chabot, Ranking Member Nydia Velazquez, and distinguished members of the committee. On behalf of Administrator Linda McMahon and the SBA family, we extend our sorrow and prayers for your colleagues and the staff that have been impacted today. We hope for their rapid recovery.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Thank you for inviting me here to speak to you today. My name is Joe Lodo, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of the United States Small Business Administration. I am here to talk to you about SBA's 2014 agency restructuring plan under the Voluntary Early Retirement Authority, VERA, and the Voluntary Separation Incentive Program, VISA. VERA provides agency the option to offer voluntary early retirement. VISA, often combined with VERA, allows agencies to offer lump sum payments to employees as an incentive to separate. Both VERA and VISA requires OPM's approval and are used along with careful strategic workforce planning to reshape the agency's workforce when undergoing substantial organizational changes such as restructuring or reorganization. In SBA's case, there was a large percentage of retirement-eligible employees at the time of the 2014 VERA Visa. 25% of the current employees were eligible to retire immediately, including 50% of those in occupation series that cover most of the field office positions. Over 1,000 SBA employees were eligible for VEER visa at the time of approval. The average SBA employee's age was 51, compared to the average age of 47 for the rest of the federal government. Because of the large number of employees eligible for the VEER visa offering, there was a risk of putting SBA in a vulnerable position, and therefore it was important to prepare for and manage these impending departures. SBA's VEER visa program was approved by OPM on August 12, 2014, and announced to the agency's employees on August 19, 2014. All employees accepting the VEER visa were required to separate from the agency by September 30, 2014. SBA's management approved 300 positions as eligible for the VEER visa. 149 employees took the VEER visa option. As the Inspector General audit report indicates, SBA did not carry out the 2014 VEER visa properly. As a result, SBA did not achieve the goals of the program. We agree with the OIG's recommendation in the audit report dated May 30, 2017, and are conducting an analysis of the program. We will document the lessons learned, including the areas of planning, implementation, results, and recommended improvements. We will include all stakeholders in the process. Since I joined the Office of the Chief Operating Officer, first as the Deputy Chief Operating Officer and now as the COO, I have worked to ensure that all personnel hiring decisions are made on a sound basis. To begin to remedy some of the mistakes made with VEER visa, I issued guidance on May 11, 2016, that all remaining 2014 VEER visa vacancies must be modified to conform to OPM's guidelines. Under Administrator McMahon, SBA has created the Resource Management Board. The mission of the board is to ensure the best use of SBA's limited resources by reviewing FTE's allotments and determining the best use of resources to accomplish the agency's mission. The board meets on a bi-weekly basis and is comprised of 4 senior executive level personnel. Further, SBA has determined that there is no need for a VEER visa program during fiscal year 2017, and consequently, we will not be offering the program to employees this fiscal year. Administrator McMahon has made it very clear that SBA must operate efficiently and effectively. She is holding every senior management accountable for the results and expects to see them. I fully share her view. Thank you very much for the invitation to testify, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. I'd first like to yield to my colleague, Mr. Kelly, who's chairman of Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, for his questions. I'll take mine then after the ranking member. And I would note that that our colleague was on the ball field this morning, and even though he served 2 tours in Iraq, that's a very stressful thing to go through. So, God bless you, man.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I first want to say I thought it was important to be here today at this hearing. We the Congress, we the people of this great nation, will not be intimidated by cowards. We all, both parties, will continue to do the people's work, even in the face of these type of things. All involved are in my prayers. I want to echo the chairman's and the ranking member's thing. Let me tell you, I was there, and our Capitol Police, those 2 great officers, Officer Bailey or Agent Bailey and Agent Griner, let me tell you, they're warriors, and they are heroes, and they saved countless lives there this morning. And with that being said, let's get to work. On May 30, 2017, the SBA Office of the Inspector General released an audit which concluded that SBA failed to effectively manage its VEER VSEP program. As a result, SBA wasted at least $2.1 million in its attempt to restructure and reshape its agency's workforce. And to Mr. Ware, your audit determined that SBA wasted $2.1 million in its attempt to restructure. How did your office determine that dollar figure?
Thanks. Congressman, the dollar figure was determined by our auditors had to, let me start with this. Let me start that because the agency did not have a tracking mechanism for those positions, our auditors had to basically go in and extrapolate this data from multiple sources to try to figure out which positions aligned with the ones that the people had left with. So they looked at whether or not the position was in the same place, did it have the same title, same area, and everything like that. And from that, they were able to identify the 54 that came up with that.
And that number only represents the balance of 54, like you said,
Yes.
that the SBA subsequently refilled without a significant change in the function in those. So that 2.1 million could even be a higher price tag than that. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And to Mr. Lodo, how were the buyouts funded, and what funding stream did the money come from?
The salary fund, the source, was the salary and benefits line item in SBA's appropriation.
I want to make sure that we dig into this. This is the people's money, and you have people up here working in a bipartisan fashion. We can't afford for these things to do that, and I know it was not necessarily on your watch, but that doesn't alleviate the responsibility to going forward to make sure that it doesn't happen worse on your watch. And I just, I want your assurance, but not really you, Mr. Ware, because you've already done your work, but Mr. Lodo, that you will do all that you can to ensure that something like this does not happen and waste the taxpayers' hard-earned dollars that they give to this Congress and to the SBA to do the people's work.
My promise to the entire committee is that that will never happen under my watch. I can add that the Chico, the Deputy Chico, are no longer with the agency, and that I've hired a Chico that's very well qualified. And in the interview process, I said to him that I want this agency's HR department to be one of the best in 2 years and the best in 3 years. Will you commit to that mission? And he said, yes, sir, I will. We're very fortunate to have the Chico, and I promise to you that all of us at SBA will never allow something that happened in the past like this to ever occur, especially on my watch.
Thank you. And Ranking Member Velasquez, thank you for your kind words, and Chairman Shabbat. Let me tell you, we are a bipartisan committee, and we're about the people's work, and there's no greater honor than to be on this committee with both of y'all. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and I think we're both honored to have you on this committee, so thank you very much. I'd now like to yield to the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ranking Member Velasquez for hosting today's meeting, and thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. I do want to identify with the remarks of both the chair and my colleague, as well as our ranking member, about the really terrible situation this morning. And of course, we keep our colleague, as well as those others who were hurt, including Capitol Police, in our prayers, and thank them for their support. I just want to take a second and introduce, if I can, Mr. Chair, my grandson, my youngest grandson, Aaron Lindsay, who is here working in my office this week. He's not getting paid, but he's learning a lot.
Welcome, all right.
He's a rising junior.
Would you
in
mind
high
standing
school.
up so we can see? All right, there we go. We want to make sure that Grandma embarrasses you enough. So.
And thank you very much for your testimony. I do want to say that the SBA, in accordance with the Inspector General's recommendation, has indicated that they'll provide written guidance outlining expectations for ensuring compliance with any OPM-approved Vera VSIP plan. Mr. Loda, will the SBA include diversity goals in its guidance to ensure that the agency has a diverse staff, concluding any future workforce restructuring?
in any Vera visa plan, as well as any plan that we're looking at in terms of restructuring or reorganizing the agency, that is a critical component in terms of making sure that the minority staff that's on board with SBA has an important role to play, and that we take into consideration their role in any plan, particularly Vera visa.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that. The OIG report concluded that the SBA did not make significant changes to its organizational structure, and that 54 of the 149 positions vacated were filled. Mr. Loda, does the lack of organizational changes and the vacant positions mean that SBA is currently understaffed?
In the fiscal year 2018, we requested 2,100, which is down 55. What we are currently doing, as a result of a discussion with Administrator Linda McMahon, is we're restructuring and reorganizing the entire agency. I have the privilege tomorrow to present those recommendations to the administrator. She allowed us to get all the senior executives together to make those recommendations in terms of improving the program and restructuring and reorganizing the agency. So that presentation will be tomorrow.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Mr. Ware, SBA has indicated that they'll take steps to meet your recommendations. However, they need additional time to do so. Do you have plans to follow up on those actions later this fall?
We definitely do have plans, and I have to say that Mr. Loda and I spoke about the recommendations, and Mr. Loda has assured us that it come even before the time that they requested. But we have a standard audit recommendation follow-up process that we work closely with the agency with, and we'll definitely be carrying them all the way through to closure using that process.
Thank you, sir. During your investigation, did SBA explain why it took them 1 year after Vera VSIP was implemented to complete their skills gap analysis?
I did not get I did not hear from them as to why it took that long, but it wasn't something that was at the forefront of the planning.
Okay.
So I would guess that they were trying to rectify that on the back
Okay,
end.
so you didn't ask the question?
I did not. I'm
Okay.
pretty sure the auditors asked the question, though. I could get that answer for you.
All right. Thank you. I would appreciate if you would, and
Okay.
thank you both very much for your responses to my questions. And again, Mr. Chair, I thank you for yielding to me.
Thank you
Yield
very
back.
much. Gentlelady yields back. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'll begin with you, Mr. Ware. What prompted your office to conduct an audit of the 2014 Vera VSIP buyout process in the first place? And do you think that the SBA's management of the Vera VSIP rollout affected agency morale?
What prompted us to look into this was that we received inquiries from the Congressional Oversight Committee, and we also received hotline complaints. And these complaints were saying that this just wasn't being rolled out correctly, that there wasn't any planning, and we in essence went and found that. But that was the reason why we went in there. And in terms of the effect on morale, our review did not focus on morale, but I would say this, that it was evident that at least some were affected enough to come forward, to go to their congressional representatives, to come to our office through the hotline, and some even went to the Office of Special Counsel. So in that regard, I would definitely say that.
How about the morale issue?
That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Our office did not take
Okay.
a look
All right.
directly at the morale issue, but it was evident that there was enough of a morale issue that the staff felt that they needed to come forward to talk about this.
Thank you. Mr. Lodo, could you comment on the morale issue?
Yes. 2 points. 2 weeks after the Vera visa was announced, the Chico, at that particular point in time, sent a letter to the rest of SBA, basically saying that to ignore the guidelines of the OPM policy and the SBA plan for Vera visa, and for any position critical, hire without any restrictions. That's the first point that I would like to make. The second is that there was a tremendous morale problem within OHRS. As the Deputy Chief Operating Officer, I went down and began day-to-day operations within the Office of Human Resources because of the lack of leadership in OHRS, given that they had no Chief Human Capital Officer at that particular point in time. I remained with OHRS for about 4 months, at which point I discovered the letter written by the CHICO ignoring the OPM guidance, at which point I rescinded the letter immediately so that the agency would follow the guidelines implemented and promised in the agreement for the VIA visa plan.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask you both a question before my next question. Are either one of you attorneys by any chance?
I am not.
I'm not.
Okay. Well, I am, and I just had a question. It's somewhat of a legal question, but it bothered me a little bit when I read that, you know, one of the purposes of this whole thing was to decrease the average age of the agency's workforce. Sounds a little bit like age discrimination to me. I don't know if the legal beagles at the department have looked into that, and perhaps this is rampant throughout the federal government. I'm not quite sure, but do either one of you want to respond to that?
You want me to take a shot, Drew? I could take a shot.
I'll take the
Okay.
first observation.
Okay.
The Office of Personnel Management has certain criteria in terms of you have to be eligible, in terms of length of service in the federal government. So basically, one option is 25 years. Another option is 20 years. So it's really based off of length of service in the federal government, not truly based off of the age per se.
Okay.
Well, can I add to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's actually one of the things that are covered under a VIRA, the use of a VIRA or a VSIP. That was one of the approved things that OPM would approve in terms of trying to help to generate a younger workforce.
Okay. It just seems instinctively bothersome to me. And I know it's number of years service, but that sort of goes with your age too. Over time, the two go hand in hand. So that bugs me a little bit. Now in Ohio, we've got judges have to retire. I believe it's at age 70. They can stay there, but they can't run for re-election after age 70, and it's gone to the Supreme Court, and they've said it's okay. So I'm assuming that I'm not the first person or the first plaintiff's attorney that's ever thought of this, and so I'm guessing somebody there. But if you wouldn't mind perhaps having your legal beagles get back to our legal beagles so we can make sure that we're covered there. And I've run out of time, so I can't ask even more probing questions at this time. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that at our age, we are more sensitive to that issue. Mr. Ware, in your testimony, you noted a number of ways that SBA might have been more successful in achieving its VERA VSIP goals. What would you identify as the underlying cause of SBA's failed VERA VSIP?
Thank you for that question. I would actually assign 3 causes to it. And the first one would be the lack of any true level of planning that would have aligned with OPM's requirements and SBA's stated goals. That would be the first one. To add to the first one as well, it's almost as if they rushed to implement something they weren't exactly ready for. Otherwise, the plan would have been done on the top. But the second one is that the lack of tracking, because they didn't like have a formal tracking mechanisms to really track who left what and what positions would need to be restructured and all that. That was the second cause, and the last one.
So what are they doing about that?
What we have
terms
not
of tracking.
We have not found as of this date, and Mr. Lodo probably could speak about that some more. But at the time that we looked, that snapshot that we looked at, and even to follow up past the snapshot, we had not found that they were able to effectively track them even out.
Okay.
And then the third one was that what Mr. Lodo spoke about, that the former Chico put out really poor guidance in the form of that memorandum that in essence told everybody in HR, you could just simply backfill the positions.
Thank you. Mr. Loro, the IG reported that as a result of the Vera Visa, SBA experienced a loss of institutional knowledge in some programs, offices, including the Office of Capital Access. What action is SBA taking to rectify this?
Thank you for the question. There are two offices that were impacted severely by the Vera Visa. 26% came from the field, and
26% came from the field?
yes, from the district offices in the field, and 16% came from the Office of Capital Access. What's important for us, knowing that that knowledge is leaving, we have the responsibility to transfer the knowledge that's within the agency to the future leaders and to the new people coming on board. We do that in four major ways. One is what we call the peer-to-peer hour. Every Thursday at 1 o'clock, throughout the agency, we provide training on different subjects.
Okay.
The second is mentoring, the third, lender-teacher, and the fourth is one related to the employees actually do this themselves in identifying areas that they want to study.
Okay. Mr. Ware, in your report, you note that the Office of Human Resource Solutions, the division responsible for planning the Vera Visa and the OPM justification, did not include the majorities of SBA leadership team in the planning of the Vera Visa. This did not occur until after the plan had been signed by the administrator and submitted to OPM. So please help me understand what effect did the leadership exclusion have on the entire process and the success of the program?
Without the leadership, without the key members of the leadership team being at the table, these people would have been in the best position to ascertain how to most effectively restructure and reshape the agencies, in particular their divisions. So not having them at the table meant that even if the plan was in place, the plan would have missed the type of insight that any of them could have brought to the table.
So,
And because of that as well, there was miscommunication and misinformation. They actually thought, because they had done it before, that they could simply backfill the positions.
so what actions are you taking to correct the inefficiency of not having the leadership been providing the input when they needed to do it?
The audit report done by the IG in Table 3 outlines 14 steps for a program related to Vera Visa. Clearly, it's communications, leadership involvement. Every one of these items were skipped in that 1 month of planning under 2014 leadership. There was no transparency, there was no communications. It was implemented in 30 days. 95 people were done by position, 54 were done because of the employee. That's not the way you would do a Vera Visa. It would never happen under my watch.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Thank you. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Comer, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You all have mentioned that the SBA did not develop any mechanism or designate any person to track who was taking advantage of the early retirement buyouts. And you also touched on the effect of not having any tracking mechanism. My question is, do you know why the SBA did not track which employees were accepting these early retirement buyout packages? Mr. Lotto?
Thank you for the question. In large part, it was due because of the letter from the Chico saying there are no restrictions in terms of your hiring, which is outside of the guidelines of the OPM policy.
Okay. Mr. Ware, what do you think the most important improvements SBA should make to increase the effectiveness of any future Vera Visa buyouts?
Well, definitely they need to sit and come up with a comprehensive plan that would get them to where they need to be in terms of their restructuring and reclassifying positions, anything they need to make them more streamlined and efficient. And of course, they could implement our recommendations, the two which they will do. And lastly, Mr. Loda spoke about the best practices associated with the effective use of Vera Visip. That's something we offered in the report and that they're aware of.
Okay. Mr. Ware, do you think the SBA's mistakes are unique to the SBA? Or do you know whether other agencies have been committing the same or similar mistakes?
In our audit, one of the things that the auditors looked for was had similar reports been done across government, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was EPA OIG, where they found that they had similar issues. Other than that, I've been in the Office of Inspector General Community for going on 28 years, and this was my first foray into this. But I do know this: that experience tells me that if you don't start at the front in terms of putting together a proper plan that you can implement, this is the type of thing that happens in all kinds of programs across government.
Right. My last question to Mr. Lotto. You stated in your testimony that SBA will not be conducting early retirement buyouts this year. Since SBA will not be using Vera or VSIP, how does SBA plan to reform its agency workforce?
Thank you for the question. Having discussions with the administrator, she asked at the very beginning, how can we restructure and reorganize the agency? She tasked the senior executives to come up with a plan to basically look at the programs and restructure the agency. We're presenting that plan tomorrow to her. It will streamline the agency, it will improve the programs, and allow us to work within the 2,100 ceiling level that we requested for fiscal year 18.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, is a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. I'm still trying to understand the skill gap, and how the skill gap really occurred from 2004, I think. Now, with my relationship in dealing with employees, with this Vero Visa option that they had, it appears that more emphasis is placed on the worker than it is on the administration. Can you respond to that with the skill gap?
Oh, well, with the skills gap analysis, that's supposed to really be done by the agency who is implementing the Vera VSIP. So what that does is one of the requirements that OPM has is in order to implement, in order to even get approval for this, you need to show that you have a real reason that you need to offer this to employees to help them to retire quickly. So the way that you do that is by restructuring. So you're saying we're no longer going to need these positions. We need a new type of skill in order to move the agency in whatever direction the agency thinks it needs to be going in. So that's what is meant by that.
Okay, I have one other question. Is either it can go to either one of you. And you might have to a certain extent, but can you describe the current status of the health of SBA with regard to the capacity to guarantee loans and provide resources to small businesses? And has the skill gap that existed before this requirement on the Vera Visa been eliminated?
The skill gap will always be a continuous problem for SBA because of people retiring and new people coming on, and we have to train middle management to be the new leaders of tomorrow. To ensure that we don't lose that knowledge, we have the specialized training for our staff, particularly in capital access, as it relates to our guarantee programs, our 504 programs, and our other lending programs.
Okay, and this would be my last question here, and it's for either of you. The economic factors that results in the Vero Visa being implemented, and is SBA immune to any of these factors?
Congressman Lawson, could you please repeat that? I didn't catch the first part of the question.
It says that, and I got this down if it's here on this answer. What economic factors can result in Vero Visa being implemented, and is SBA immune to any of these factors?
Joe, you want me to go? Figure that's an agency question.
The agencies works in an environment that's changing, where the economy is good and sometimes less good. The wonderful programs that we offer are applicable whether there are bad times or good times in terms of our lending programs, our contracting programs, our counseling programs. We have the economic toolbox for the nation's small businesses to survive and thrive in an economy, particularly when the economy is on a downswing and lending seems to slow down. Our guarantee program has in the past and will in the future continue to help and save our nation's small businesses, particularly on a downturn.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Luetkemeyer, who's the vice chairman of this committee, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome witnesses. Kind of curious, why we have a situation where we talked about there wasn't a skills gap analysis. Why wasn't that done prior to the OPM approval of the plan? It would seem to me that there'd be documents and proposals and plans that would need to be in place and approved prior to their approval for the entire program and any money being released. Was that not done?
Your statement is absolutely correct. It was not done. It's absolutely.
Is that not part of the process?
It's very
Could you
much,
pull that mic a little closer just so everybody can hear you?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's all
It's
right.
very much part of the process, and it was not done.
So
The entire plan was done in 30 days. It did not follow 12 of the 14 recommended approaches in terms of building out a Vero Visa plan. This was meant primarily to help what turned out to be
Not to
100
interrupt you, but that mic is still you got it over here, and if you could, there's people in
Like
the
that?
room, and yep, there you go.
The program was offered to 149 people. What's disappointing is 54 people. It was not about positions, it was about who they were, the employee. And the lack of that planning, the lack of communications, and the lack of leadership really caused that program to be a failure before it even started.
So what you're telling me is OPM is the one that really screwed up here from the standpoint. They approved a plan without all of the documentation and everything in place, without checking all the boxes. Is that what you just said?
The Office of Personnel Management approved the plan with real due diligence. They should not have, but they did, and we violated what we agreed to.
Okay, to follow up on that, are there any processes in place? Now, Mr. Ware, you recall, I guess the first question is, today you indicated that there were some folks that contacted your office, and that's why you instigated the investigation.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that correct?
Yes.
Are you normally, do you in a routine go through and audit this programs like this, or do you have to have a contact in order to be able to go do that?
No, thank you for the question. Currently, we have a risk-based approach to the many programs that the SBA has in order to efficiently and effectively put our resources where they need to be to make sure that we're covering everything.
Okay, so you don't have a routine that you go through like every 6 months, every year, every 5 years, you go through an audit program. You have to have some sort of a reason to go in. Is that
No,
what
sir.
you tell me?
True.
Okay.
We do for the major programs.
Okay, so does OPM then, do they have a review process? Is part of the process of allowing this to happen, approving this, the Vero Visa plan, is part of that process for them to go back and periodically review, or do they request reports, periodic reports, audits?
Yes, they do. We found that is part of it. They
Were they
did.
doing it?
They
Obviously
no,
not.
Actually, no. What we found was that a requirement was made that they had to do quarterly updates. But what we found was the agency reported to OPM that it was too premature at that stage to provide the quarterly updates, and there was no follow-up.
So OPM really dropped the ball on this one. Yes, sir, Mr. Lola.
What SBA presented to OPM some of the premises that they used were false.
Mr. Ludo, could you,
What OPM received from SBA were some false premises. And as a result of those false premises, they made a decision. Their decision based off of false premises is why we ended up with an approval.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is we got two bad actors here. We got the SBA that didn't fulfill the requirements of the plan that they requested to be put in place and approved for, and got OPM that really approved a plan they shouldn't have to begin with because none of the documentation was in place and didn't do in the audits that were necessary. Is that a fair statement?
I would say that they had limited documentation, and some of that documentation was false. And as a result, they approved the plan.
Okay.
I would say this.
Like one more question, be quick.
Okay. Okay, be quick. What I would say is this. I think that the necessary boxes were checked based on what SBA provided them and telling them that they were going to do.
Okay. Okay, so we know we had a bad actor at SBA who wrote a letter that sort of said, here's a get out of free jail card, do what you want to do, ignore the guidance from this plan. Has that person been prosecuted? Has there any sort of charges been brought? Is there any sort of punitive action been taken against that individual?
That Chico is no longer with SBA.
That's not my question.
There were no penalties other than she's no longer.
Did he get a Vera Visa plan exit package?
She didn't apply
she,
for the
whoever it
Vera
was?
Visa. However, the coup did, who had oversight over this plan and took the $25,000, which is also disappointing.
Well, if I may,
the gentleman's time has expired, but this is getting interesting, so the chair will give you an additional minute.
okay, so we have someone here who basically violated the tenet of the approved plan. There's no punitive action being planned whatsoever. Is that what you're telling me?
The person no longer works for SBA, and there are no punitive plans in place. What
Okay.
we are witnessing is the lack of integrity, the lack of vision, and the lack of execution.
Okay, we have $2.1 million that was doled out apparently incorrectly. Is that what you're telling me, Mr. Ware?
Yeah.
So therefore, is there any chance of getting that back or taking, because of this individual's blatant disregard for the plan itself?
It's important to understand this, that the $2.1 million, they were actually paid to folks who qualified for a program that SBA offered.
Yeah, but they were paid under false pretenses from the standpoint that we didn't have a skills gap analysis done here to show that the people that they're replacing would replace them, or this is not the way that the program should be qualified. Or they shouldn't be qualified,
The
correct?
gentleman's time's expired, but go ahead and answer the question.
That's actually a part of the execution of the plan after these people have duly qualified to leave. That's the execution was what went wrong with the plan. But these people appropriately applied for and got what they applied for.
I appreciate the chair's indulgence. Thank
The
you.
gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Tax, and Capital Access, recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, before I ask my questions, there's a young lady I'd like to introduce. She's a Girl Scout intern. She's been with me all week, or this week. Miss Lindsay Rogers from Centerville, Virginia. Could she?
Lindsay, if you could stand up.
I think, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, she's trying to measure what seats you'd like to have up here. I think that's what she's doing. I'd like to follow up to what my colleague was just raising some questions, particularly to the Inspector General. And you have some experience on this. Based on your experience, do you feel the administration past history will tend towards compliance? So I know a lot of specific questions have been asked to you, but as you have gone through this process, do you think that it will tend towards compliance?
My work with Mr. Lodo has shown me that he is at face value at what he has said. This has been my experience with working with Joe for over a year. And he has moved quickly and swiftly when he heard about what was going on. And he has assured us that he's going to comply with our recommendations even before the date that we agreed to. And I have no reason to doubt that he would do what he says as long as he's in that position.
Mr. Lodo, to your knowledge, are there any plans to attempt to privatize any of the jobs that currently exist in SBA?
In our plan that we're presenting
Yes.
to the administrator tomorrow, it would be, I think, premature for me to make that conclusion because it's the administrator's decision. But generally speaking, we're looking to improve our programs. I have not identified any programs that would be outsourced at this particular point.
At this point, but is that on the table in the discussions?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, okay. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Blum, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee on Agriculture, Energy, and Trade, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panelists for being here today. Mr. Lodo, my question is going to be directed toward you. I think you stated in your testimony that Administrator McMahon instructed senior-level executives in the SBA to put together a plan to streamline the agency. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
When's the last time the agency was streamlined?
I joined the agency in 1991. This is the first time that I have witnessed where senior executives have come together to offer to the administrator reorganizing, restructuring, and looking at programs to improve them to our nation's small business.
That's like 26 years ago, a long time ago?
That's correct.
My question, I come from the private sector. I was CEO of a publicly traded company. Does the agency need to be told to streamline, to reorganize, to be more effective, more efficient, stewards of the taxpayers' money? Please answer that.
The answer to that question is under the leadership of Administrator Linda McMahon, there's no need to tell her that. She is definitely interested in...
No, I said, does the agency, though, the first time in 25 years you've streamlined, why wouldn't the management of the agency streamline the agency every other year, every 5 years? Why is there 20 years in between?
I think we go through that in what I would call a micro approach, a particular program, or a particular restructuring of a different office, of a particular office. But what we're looking at and what will be presented to the administrator tomorrow is the restructuring and reorganizing of the entire agency. And she has a requirement to report to OMB by June 30th on those recommendations.
Yeah, and she comes from the private sector, so I'm sure she has. I'm just wondering why it took 26 years. I would think the management of the agency would want to do that on their own, is my point. Are you familiar with best practices? Best practices in the private sector, are you familiar with that concept?
Absolutely. Having owned 2 small businesses that grew very rapidly, we did it all the time because the markets were changing.
So do you stay abreast of best practices today in your job?
Yes, absolutely. I have to, particularly on the technology side and particularly as it relates to cybersecurity.
And do you think the agency is effective, is efficient, is a great steward of taxpayer money today?
It will be after Administrator Linda McMahon makes the decisions on the proposals submitted to her.
So it hasn't been.
There's room for improvement, significant room for improvement.
Now, in your compensation plan, is there incentives in your compensation plan to have the agency be streamlined and effective and efficient?
That would be a decision by the administrator. There are funds that could be used for to award people for performance outside of the normal routines.
That's good to hear, because I think we need incentives, more incentives like they have in the private sector and the public sector, so the employees of the federal government have an incentive to save taxpayers money.
If I could add.
Absolutely.
The Senior Executive Service of the Small Business Administration is absolutely committed to improving the efficiency and effectiveness of the agency. Under Administrator Linda McMahon, this is the first time we've had that option.
It's good to hear. Bad to hear about the past, but good to hear that things are changing. As a committee, how do we judge your performance?
the support.
Do you have markers? Do you have performance goals, parameters that we're familiar with, that we're aware with, or is this like typical federal agency? It just goes on and on and on forever without any real measurement, without anybody being held accountable?
Let me frame this answer in the words of Administrator Linda McMahon. We have performance plans, and in fact, my office overlooks those performance plans to make sure that they're done. When I reported to her that they were not in the best shape, this was her message to the supervisors and the leadership of SBA on her first week at SBA. In her opinion, it is intolerable that those performance plans are not perfect and that the communications between the supervisors and the staff must occur in person when possible. Then she went on to say, anything less than that she views as insubordination.
It's good to hear. I have confidence in Administrator McMahon. It's just I'm concerned about the past, but we can't change that. All we can do is change the future. So thank you for your answers, and I yield back the time I don't have.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair would just note for the record, we're very, very encouraged to hear the words of the gentleman. So we'll follow up down the road and see if it actually happened. We certainly hope it does, and the committee is determined to do everything we can to work with you to make sure that does happen. And unless one of our colleague would come, our final interrogator this afternoon will be the gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, and then the ranking member has a question after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Velasquez. I'll be brief. Much has been said already. Mr. Loda, I want to know what is the SBA doing to attract more younger members of employees, the millennium types, to fill these vacancies? What is your outreach to ensure that kind of a new employee comes in?
The agency is very fortunate to have 68 district offices across the country. When we place an announcement for recruiting, it's required to go out onto USA Jobs. In addition to that, our office under the Office of Human Capital Resources reaches out to particular organizations and in government as well, in terms of OHRS, as well as the CIO councils, to look for people that could come on board with SBA. So we're looking at targeted communities, we're looking at the broad USA Jobs, and we're looking at the specialty areas where we can find the people that are good in cyber, find the people that are good in an HR, as well as the most important people that we have, the people in the field that work day in and day out with our nation's small businesses.
I will encourage that as technology continues to play a bigger role in small business, that there's a full effort to try to engage those that are really knowledgeable in assisting small businesses in that endeavor. And what about diversity? How are you planning to make the agency be fully diverse? And what are you doing to recruit from different groups?
We have an office that reports to me under the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and EEO. They report to all of senior management by office in terms of the makeup of the staff that we have. And where we have a disparity, we in OHRS need to resolve that issue, and that's why we target particular communities in order to be able to cause that gap to be removed.
Again, in this arena also, many small businesses are owned by recent arrivals or first-generation Americans that require, I think, daily access to the services that you provide, but perhaps are not getting there to the front door because there may not be a full effort with regards to having a healthy diversity within the agency that will get them there. So I encourage you to also do that. I yield my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and the ranking member has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Loro, how long you been at SBA, working at SBA?
I've been at the Small Business Administration since 1991. I joined in the District Director Candidate Program. I was the first person hired outside of the agency from the private sector.
And so when they were working, the administration, at SBA was working on the Vera Visa plan. What position did you hold?
I was the deputy in the disaster assistance program.
So you were not working at the office that was in charge of overseeing and,
That's correct, and if I was, this would not have happened.
okay. Thank you.
That was the right that was the right answer. So, but that concludes the questions for today. We want to thank both of you for your testimony. It's been very important, and clearly the SBA needs to do better. And I like what I'm hearing, and as I say, sometime down the road, and our staff will work with your staff, we'd like to hear what is, what the results have been from the reforms and improvements that are being made there. And I would remind members that they will have 5 days to extend their remarks or add supplemental materials. And if there's no further business come before the committee, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.